Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to show you how I created this test for my laser engraver that lets me test out all its different settings for speed and power in a single job. If you watched my recent review of the AtomStack A5 M50 Pro, I did perform this test and it looked a little something like this, and I'll put that up on the big screen for you as well. As you can see, you have all these different shades from the laser, and you can basically use this a bit like a color palette whenever you're working with a new material or a new machine. So Lightburn here has already been set up for my particular machine, which is the AtomStack M50 Pro. So let's go up to the rectangle tool here. We're going to draw out a rectangle anywhere on the page. Up in the top left, you can see near this padlock icon, we've got a width and a height. Now your padlock icon might be fixed, it might be turned on, and that means that if we change the height, the width will change proportionally. But we want to disable that, so we're going to uncheck that. Now as I said there, the height I'm going to go for around 150, and I'm working in millimeters by the way, and the width I'm going to go for 130. Hit enter. Now you can see we've got this nice little rectangle. So we're going to come back up to our move tool here, our selection tool. If you click and drag the middle of this, you can drag it down here, and that's just going to be the outline of our test. One thing I like to do as well, which is kind of neat, is to add a bit of a radius to the corners. So at the bottom left here there's a radius tool. Click on that, and we can click on each corner of the rectangle. And there we go, we now have a nice radius for our test. You can hit the selection tool and click anywhere off the rectangle, and that will deselect it for you. Now one thing to note here, up in the top right I have visible this cuts and layers section. You might not be able to see that. You might have one of these showing here which is in a different tab. Just note for me here it's the first one, which is cuts and layers. If you click on that, you'll see this option. Now because we're creating an outline here, our layer mode is set to line, and we're going to stick with that. And if I right click and do a preview here on my workspace, that gives you a sample of what the laser is going to create. And in this case, if we drag the bar across, you can see in a time series format how that's going to cut. So we're going to keep that at line, and that'll be more important a little later on. So now that we have our rectangle, we need to create all our other little squares or rectangles to perform our test. So we're going to grab our rectangle tool once again, and we're going to zoom in. Now what I like to do here as a rough estimate is if we draw another rectangle and use an entire square as a reference. But we're going to go for around a half square. But we're going to set the parameters anyway, so it doesn't matter, it's just a bit of a guide. Once again, you want your padlock deselected, and I like to set the height here to 7.5. That gives you enough of a surface area to make a good judgment as to whether that setting is what you want or not. If you make it too small, it might be a little harder to see. So again, a width of 10 and a height of 7.5, and I'm going to hit enter. If we grab our selection tool, click off it, now we have this nice little square here. Now if you remember on my other example, I have this 10 by 10 array, right? And you might be thinking, well, I don't want to go ahead and draw all these little squares 100 times, and we're not going to do that. We're going to use this awesome tool called the array tool. Now if we select our first rectangle there, and we come down to this tool here, create an array of the selected objects. We're going to click that. Now this brings up a new window, and it's going to give us a horizontal and a vertical section. We want to stick with the horizontal section for now, and as I said, it's a 10 by 10 array, so our X columns are going to be 10. And you'll notice what it's done there is it's automatically created those additional rectangles for us. Now yours might have had an increased spacing, so yours might look something like this, and it's not quite fitting inside of the cut area that we defined. So if you just decrease the spacing until you're comfortable with how it fits, and we may need to adjust our cut size a little later, we'll do that as we go along, but I'm going to go with a comfortable 12 spacing here. Again, yours might be different, it depends how you've set it up. So let's click OK, and straight away I know we're going to need a little extra space here on the right, because we're going to need to add some text there as well. So let's go ahead and edit our original rectangle. If you just select it with the selection tool, you can click and drag, and that'll just extend that just a little bit to around there. In fact, let's set it to 155. There we go. So now we have a bit more space on the edge, and we have our horizontal array here. And you're probably imagining, right, we can do the same for vertical, and that's correct. So we're going to highlight our horizontal array of rectangles. We're going to grab the array tool once again, and this time we're going to be interested in the vertical section. Again, we want to do this 10 times so that we have a 10 by 10 array. My spacing here is set to 12, but as I said, yours might be something different, or it might even be set to a minus and they're sort of down below your design. Flip the minus to a positive and that'll fix that for you. Just set your height and your spacing and it should work perfectly. So let's hit OK, and there we go. And just be aware you can still move this around. So if I want to highlight all of these rectangles, for example, I can move it with my move tool just like anything else. I like everything to be neat and proportional, so I'm going to have it there so that it's centered with our radius, and it just looks a lot better. Now that we've done our array, the next important step is defining our speed and power settings. So to make this easy to keep track of, what we're going to do is assign a new layer to each of these horizontal arrays. And how we do that is using this toolbar down the bottom here that has all these different numbers and colors. So if we highlight our top element of the array here, and we're going to set this to layer 1, and it's going to turn it blue, just like that. And you'll notice now in the top right, in our cuts and layers tab, we've got an additional layer and it's set to fill. Now that's very important, and we touched on that earlier. Let me set it to line, and if we right click again and go to preview, it'll now show you what our cut's going to look like, and you can see it's done an outline here of everything. Now let's go ahead and change layer 1 to fill, and we'll do our preview once again, and you can see exactly what's happened there. It's filling the shape rather than outlining the shape, which is exactly what we want for this laser test. We want to fill in all these squares so that we can see it clearly and determine what settings we want to use for our other jobs. So that's a key distinction to know about, and we're going to set all these array elements to fill. Just like we did there, we're going to need an additional layer for each element of the array. So I'm going to go ahead to layer 2, which is red. I'm going to assign that one. And you get the idea. So we go through all of these. That's going to be green for layer 3, yellow for layer 4, orange for layer 5, teal for layer 6, we've got pink for layer 7, grey for layer 8, sort of a navy for layer 9, and then a burgundy colour for layer 10. And now let's look at our cuts and layers section up here. It's looking very busy, and you can see mine's automatically assigned my speed and power settings because it's remembered them from the previous job, but I'm going to run you through that anyway. Let's right click and preview. Make sure that all of your array rectangles are set to fill, and that's really important. As I said, make sure that's correct. And now what we'll do is up here you can see there's a column called speed and power. We want our power for all of these layers to be set at 100%. Forget about the speed for a moment. So if we click on our layer 0 here, which is the black outline, I want that to be 100%. And the way we change it is using this box down here. It's set to 100%. So make sure you go through each of these layers and ensure that is set to 100%. For example, this one here is 70%. When I come down here and I change it to 100 and hit enter, it's now updated there. So all our power settings need to be 100%. And another thing worth noting, if any of your outputs here are disabled, for example layer 4 and 5, you can see it's hidden it there from our design. If we preview, it will not output those layers to the machine. So that's important. If they're turned off, turn them on. The speed settings are completely up to you, right? It's going to be dependent on your machine. My particular machine can do up to 6,000 millimeters a minute. Yours might be a lot faster or a lot slower. So you need to pick speeds that you're interested in and speeds that you're curious about when it comes to your testing. So I built mine up fairly slowly. I'm going to start with a 500. So again, similar to the power, we can click on each of these layers and set the speed. So I'm going to go up from 500 here to 750 and 1000, 1250, 1500, 1750, 2000. You get the idea. So make sure you set your speeds in there, and we'll add the text element in a moment to make it easier to understand. So once you've done that and you have something that looks like what I've created here, double check your speed and power, make sure they're all correct. And now what we're going to do is assign a power scale to our arrays so that we can create that test. So just to remind you, if we right click and preview, this is what it looks like currently. And that's not what we want, right? Because they're all at 100% power. And you're probably thinking, well, that's not correct. So what we'll do is come back to our array elements. And up till now we've been working with the horizontal array for the layers. But we can also select the vertical element of the array, like this. And then over here where our cuts and layers tab is, if you come to the right, there's one called shape properties. If you click on that, there's a variable in here called power scale. And what this will do is it'll apply a scale of the maximum power to anything we've selected here. So we want that to be 10 in this case, because we're going to step our power up in percentages of 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way up to 100. Again, you might do this differently. You might want to see what 12.5% looks like, or 55%. Do what's right for your particular test, but you get the idea. We can set a power scale here. I'm going to set this to be 10 and hit enter. Now if we click anywhere on the screen to deselect those, if we right click and preview, you can see that that first column there is a different shade to the others. And I think you can probably see where this is going now. Next up, we select the second column, like this. We do the same thing, come into our shape properties tab, but this time we're going to set it to be 20%. We're going to hit enter. And if we preview, here we go, you can see that's a slightly darker shade, and it's going to build that up all the way to 100%. So for each of these columns you need to go through, manually set your power there, hit enter, preview again, there we go. So I'm going to do this for each of them and skip ahead the video just because it saves a bit of time, and you should get the idea by now. So there we go, I've set all these up. As you can see, my penultimate column here is 90, and obviously the last one is already at 100 because that's what we set it to anyway. So if we right click and preview, what you'll see is this nice gradient effect where we're going from 10% power all the way up to 100, and that is exactly what we're looking for. Another thing also worth clarifying here is to make sure that your pass count for this test is set to 1. My pass count here has been set higher than 1 because I've been cutting in previous project files and it remembers your layer settings. So just make sure your pass count is 1. So we're going to go through all of them. So there we go, our pass count is 1, and now if we do a preview, we should see a drastic reduction in total time estimation. So this cut would take around 1 hour and 10 minutes on my machine. As I said, yours will be different depending on what settings you've applied. Now what we can do is add those text elements that really make this a decent little test that you can look at and reference in the future. So once again, I think we're going to increase the height of this a little bit. So you can click on it, drag it up slightly, and that'll give you a bit of wiggle room when it comes to doing the cut. So let's go and grab the text tool here on the left. So we're going to grab that, click anywhere on the screen, and we're just going to enter a value of 10. Now yours might be a lot bigger, it might be something like this. At the top here there's a height setting. I'm going to set it to 7.5 because it suits this project. And again, if you grab the selection tool, you can click and drag this around. Now what do we just learn about not wasting too much time? Let's highlight our text tool, go down to our array, and we're going to duplicate this 10 times, just like we did with the rectangles. And we're going to hit OK. Now what we can do is go in, quickly edit those. So let's grab the text tool again. We're going to make that 20. And remember, these are our power settings, so we can just edit these exactly how we want to. And there we go. That is going to be our power settings indicator for the top. You can move them up a little bit if you wanted to. If we highlight them all, let's move them up just a touch to give them a bit of space. There we go. We can do the exact same thing down the right hand side, which is going to be an indication of our speed. So let's grab the text tool once again. We'll set that up here, and we'll make the first one relevant to the power settings that we've set. Remember, if you've done different settings to me, you need to set this up accurately as well. So I'm going to do a little bit of space. Again, we're going to have 500. Let's highlight the first one, grab our array tool. We're going to go 10 rows down, and as you can see, it's done it in the opposite direction, but I want it to go down. So if you change the Y spacing to -12 in this case, that'll flip that for you and save you a bit of time. So let's hit OK. Same thing again, we're going to go in, grab our text tool on the left, and we're going to adjust these to match these settings that I have here on my screen. So there we go, I've updated my speed labels, and just a little tip for you here. Notice that they've gone out of alignment here and they stay in centralized. If you select them all, come up to the top here, there's an alignment tool. Click on that, and we're going to click align left. And look what happens, they jump back into position, which is awesome. Let's highlight that again, and we're going to move them slightly to the right, just to allow a bit of space between the rectangles and our text. Now what I like to do as well to keep track of what these cuts are and what materials they're for is to actually engrave that on the surface itself. So similar to my one, I like to do a bit of text up the top here. So for example, we can grab the text tool again, and I might just want to put down engraving test. You can put whatever you want on here. Again, if we want to add more text, we can select our text, right click, duplicate, and that'll just let us drag another one down. So this one underneath, I like to make the name of the machine. So I like to do machine, just name the machine on there. Again, move it around. I also like to define the line interval. Line interval is something that's also worth covering. So for each of our layers here, there's a parameter under pass count, which is called interval in millimeters. If you've worked with lasers before, you'll know that the interval is a bit of a trade-off, because the lower your interval, the higher quality outcome you're going to get on your engraving, but it's going to take considerably longer. So you need to try and find a balance between cut time or job time and the interval height. So that is again something you could play around with, which is why I like to define this here on the test. So if we select that, we're going to right click, duplicate, drag it underneath, and I like to actually define the interval on here. So we're going to edit the text. Interval, 0.1 millimeters in my case. Sometimes when setting up Lightburn, it'll pick the best settings for your machine. And like I said, yours may be different to mine, and that's okay. But don't let it put you off trying different interval settings, because you may get better cuts, you may get worse cuts, but it's the only way that you'll find out. And the other thing I like to add on here is, if we duplicate again, drag this underneath, I like to define the material, which I think is also important. So there we go, let's drag that in. I've just put an example there of 3.2 millimeter ply. And once again, if we want all this to be aligned, we can highlight, use our alignment tool up here, align left, and there we go, it's all nice and aligned for us. Another reason why it's worth listing the thickness is because you can perform similar tests for cutting as well. So where I talked about the pass count, if you have a higher pass count on individual rectangles or layers, you can test cutting, and I'm going to make a separate video about that. The only other thing we need to do, as with any good graph, is to add some axes labeling here. This isn't essential, but you know, if you're doing a test, you might as well do it properly. So let's go ahead and duplicate the text one more time. We'll drag this over, and all we're going to put in here is power and our unit of measurement there, which is percentage. We'll do the same, we'll right click and duplicate. We can also rotate this too, so I'd use the rotate feature up here, 90. That'll rotate 90 degrees. Bring this down roughly to the middle, and we're going to change the text to speed, and our unit of measurement in my case is millimeters per minute. Yours might be inches per minute or something else. So just make sure you're aware of your units, so that when you're setting your speeds, you're not setting something that your machine can't handle. So let's right click and preview, and as you can see there, we have a job ready to go that's going to test out all of our different settings and speeds in a single operation, which is awesome. You won't believe how many people out there will engrave one image at a time when it comes to testing these out, and it's just such a waste of time. You can see there, in an hour and 20 minutes we get a good overview of the machine and what it's capable of. The only other thing worth noting is, if you don't want your text to be solid or filled, just like I talked about before, come up to your layer. For this example, the text is layer 10, which is in brown. Set it to line. Then if we right click and preview, you'll see your text will be hollow, but that's again user preference, and it's completely up to you. And it's worth noting there that we've assigned our text to the same layer as our 5000 millimeters per minute layer at the bottom, so we don't want to do that. So what we can do is change that back to fill. We're going to highlight all of our text, so you can do that by highlighting, hold control and just continue to select until you've got all of the text. Then we're going to assign those objects to layer 0, which is the black layer, and you can do that by clicking on the bottom left here. We missed one out, so we'll do that again. So click on 4000, come down to the black layer, click on it, that'll reassign that layer position. And now if we right click and preview, there we go. Now you can perform this test on any machine, on any material, and within an hour or so you're going to know what it's capable of. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you appreciate my content and you want to support me directly, please consider becoming a website member. I'll leave links in the description below. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video.